Hello my friends, welcome back for another Raggedy Rescue. This time I'm very excited to say that we are going to making this little gal clothes. That's what this whole video is going to be about. I also want to give a little shout out to Maria Rose, who caught in my last video featuring this doll in particular that I had mended this arm in the wrong direction. So I have fixed that now so her arms match. And now let's make her some clothes. I wanted to share a quick note with you guys about marking your patterns. There are all kinds of ways to mark them, and I've tried lots of them. These are some of the ways that I do it. When you are looking at your pattern, this is, for example, the dress pattern, there will be places where like these dotted lines or this circle, you're going to want to mark that, and it will let you know in the pattern where you need to mark. And the ways you can do that are friction pen is one way that I like. This is chalk marker, which is a great way. This is one of my favorite tools. This is a Mark B gun, works okay. This is a Sewline pencil, a ceramic pencil. This works great. Taylor's chalk. A really easy way to do it is tracing paper. This is Clover. There's also Sorrel paper, which is really good. And I'll put links to all of these in case you're just curious about them. They're just all of the ways that you can mark your pattern. It's just an important step to do. It makes following the pattern a lot easier. We'll be starting with the dress, which is piece 6. In my copy of the pattern, it's at the top left of page 2, and the very first instruction are pin tucks. I've already marked my pin tucks on the inside. So we're going to bring these lines together, and I like to do that just by finding the line with a pin on both sides. Just pull that together. See that there? And then we will stitch from here to here. Go and put another little pin there. We'll stitch here, and then we will repeat on this side. I've stitched these with a little back stitch beginning and end, and then you take these and you flatten them out, and I like to do that by putting a knitting needle inside, and then I bring it up to where the stitching starts and I press from there up, and that just makes it easier to open these tucks from the inside. And you'll know you've done it correctly because when you get them opened, they line up with the neckline. Our pin tucks are basted, and I just changed my thread to match this beautiful grunge fabric that I'm using today. And the next thing we'll be doing is a narrow hem on this little section right here. You can see this area above the circle. We're just going to do a narrow hem right here. It doesn't call for a hem. Specifically, there's a hem in the next step, so you know that that's a different thing, and it only shows it folded over once, but I really like a hem. So if you have a rolled hem foot and you feel comfortable using it, that's what I like to do. And I can show you here. I will also tell you that on my grandmother's doll, she actually used bias tape here. So she would sew it to the front and turn it to the back. Next up, we'll be doing a 1/4 inch hem on the sleeves. I've added a 1/4 inch hem to each sleeve. And now you can see that I've added a chalk line here. This is the elastic line that's on the pattern. It is exactly 3/4 away from the hem when you stitch that out. So I pull out one of my quilting rulers and I use my chalk roller, and I will put links in the description in case you're interested in any of these things. These are just my favorite tools. I've put this line here, and then what we will do is we will start this in the machine. I'll put a couple of stitches here, and then I will stretch this out and sew the rest of it. This is 5 inches of 1/4 inch elastic. It shows you right in the pattern exactly how much you need based on your doll size. So this is a 20-inch doll, so I needed 5 inches. So you can see here how that works. I take a couple of stitches, make sure my needle is down, stretch out that elastic, and then just follow the line. And that gives you your nice little gather for the sleeve. I'll be using this fun coordinate for the apron, so I thought this would be a great rickrack to use to make all of these colors pop. The rickrack is always the trickiest for me personally. You do measure it more or less from the center. I always kind of cut a rough length to make sure it'll be longer than what I need. So you can see it's a little bit longer than what I need. You put, in this case, this is a printed rickrack, so we put the right side down because the pretty side is down, and then we're gonna baste that all the way around. I've only pinned this part because I tend to baste here, and then I baste these sections, and after that I will go back and sew the whole thing. Here I've got the neck basted, and I wanna show you just a little bit of detail here. So I basted from here to here, and then I stopped, and I straightened out a little bit, and I basted a little more, and then I stopped, and then I straightened out a little bit so that you can see how when you flip this over, you get your rickrack on the outside, and that lines the doll's neck. I've gone back and I've stitched along my basting line because I was happy with it. The only place I really need to remove the basting is right here. You can remove it all if you feel more comfortable doing that. If it's not in danger of coming out, I generally just leave it. At this point, we will snip these curves so our neckline will lay a little nicer. You can cut V shapes if you prefer. I tend to just snip because this is such a narrow seam. So I've pressed this now, and when I stitch it, I'm gonna fold this in and I'll snip most of this off. I'll just leave one of these little rickrack bumps, not sure what the technical term is, and I'll stitch that right down. Here's our rickrack top stitch, and doesn't that look amazing? It's one of my favorite parts of this whole process. Now the magic starts to happen. We're gonna sew the back seam, and this is really gonna start looking like a dress. So I've got my 1/4" seam in here, and it says to clip the left back to the circle. Was previously there before I ironed my friction pin, and so I have done that. Here I'm gonna add an optional step. I like to serge as much of my inside seams as I can, so I'm gonna do a little serge line here. You can leave it just like this. You can add a zigzag line. You can also press it open. And here is what that's gonna look like. Next, we'll move on to these side seams, and that goes from the bottom of the sleeve all the way down to the side of the dress. And you just match your marks, match your elastic, your hem on your sleeve, all the way down to the bottom curve of your dress. So I have my 1/4" seam in here, and at this point you can leave it just like this. I again like to serge, so I'm gonna snip this underarm, and then I will serge here, and I will serge here, and I will do that on both sides. I have my side seams in, they're serged, and now we're gonna do the hem. So at this point I deviate from their instructions a little bit. They have a wider hem that is eased in, and I've done it that way. It works beautifully. I don't enjoy doing it that way. I've done it 2 different ways that I like better. Either I do a narrow hem and a narrow hem, or I'm gonna do what I'm doing today, which is I'm going to serge this first, and then I'm gonna hem that up. You do it whichever way works for you. Here's my serged edge. I'm gonna take this over to my ironing board and press this hem up. I only do a little bit over 1/4 inch just past the serged line, and then I will top stitch right along the edge. And there we are. I did a top stitch on this. I actually did stitch it from the front, so I have a 1/4 inch hem all the way around. Everything is done except for the snaps at the neck. This is not in the instructions, but I like to add a little extra stitching right here at the base of this opening just to keep it from pulling apart. I like to use these little sew-on snaps. I've also used a tie. I've seen them with a button and a loop back here. Do whatever makes the most sense to you and whatever you think is friendliest to small hands, because I always try to keep in mind that the ultimate goal is to have these dolls back in the hands of a child. I've got my snap-in. The pattern calls for 3. I usually use 1. I have found that it's more than enough, especially when you have an apron on top. Before we move on to the next step, I thought we'd go ahead and dress this Raggedy Ann. She is long overdue for a new dress. Isn't that just so much better? All she needs now is her apron and her bloomers, and she will be complete. So next up, we're going to work on bloomers. This is also 20-inch doll size. This is pattern piece number 11 from McCall's 8377. They do call these panties, but they're really bloomers because they're little pants with elastic legs. So the first thing I'm going to do is mark these little dots right here. This is just a tiny piece of the clover tracing paper. I just snipped a little bit out, and then I'm going to put that there. And this is a knitting needle. I find that really useful just to roll that on there, and then you'll see that it's there. I'm going to take my piece of tracing paper, put it face down, and put the one I just traced on top. And I don't know if you can see it where you are, but I can see it through right here. And I'm just going to give that a little rub, and that'll transfer it to both sides. So now I'll take it to the other side and we'll do the same thing. I am going to deviate just a little bit from the directions here. Because I have a serger, one of the things I like to do is I like to put a serged line top and bottom, and just like the dress, I like to have finished edges. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. I've serged the top and I've serged the bottom on each piece. And the next thing we're going to do is we will be sewing these right sides together, where I have the blue marks as the inside, right sides together on the center front seam. If at any time you get turned around, just pull out your pattern and you can see center back, center front. I have my seam line in here for the front center seam, as you can see. I wanted to point out you do follow this line where you get this little V shape so that when you turn this under, it will turn into the inside and it will be nice and flat. Our next instruction is to turn this under 1/4 inch and then turn it on the casing line. Since I have serged it, I'm just going to turn it down on the casing line. And as you can see, it's almost exactly 3/4 inch. So I will use my seam gauge, which is what this is, and I will set it to 3/4 inch. Turn it down, and I will press it all the way across. I have everything pressed. I have my casing pressed, and I have my hem on the bottom of the legs pressed. I have the casing stitched, and I have the hem stitched. At this point, we're going to start adding elastic, and this is the same as before. We have a little diagram right in the pattern that shows if you have a 20-inch doll, you want 11 inches for the waistline and 5 5/8 for each leg. So I've already cut those out here. We've got an 11-inch and 5 5/8 for each leg. We'll start with the waistline. We'll put this in and we'll tack it at this end, pull it all the way through, tack it at this end. For the legs, they'll be done just like the sleeves, where we'll be sewing them to the inside of the fabric. The legs are very similar to the sleeves. The line is going to be approximately 3/4 inch away from the edge. Really, we're going to go an inch because I made the hem just a little wider. So we're going to go about here. And what this is going to do, there's my little chalk line. And what this is going to do is give me a guideline. I have the elastic in the legs, as you can see. I just love how it makes the little ruffle. And I wanted to show you this cool little tool. When you're doing your casing, your elastic in your casing, you can use a safety pin, you could use a tapestry needle, all kinds of things. And I do that all the time. But I do have this tool that was given to me by a friend that I wanted to show you guys. So you pull your elastic in one end, you sort of thread it almost like a needle, but it's a little double thread, and it's super cool. You just slide it through, and it's nice and big, so it gives you something to grip onto. And you can see I went right through that center with no problem because I did base those seams. So I'm going to stop right here so that I can stitch this down, and then I'll pull this the rest of the way out and I'll stitch it at this end. We're almost done with our pants at this point. We've got our elastic in the waist, and from here we are going to sew together our center back seam to the dot. So I have our back center seam sewn down to the circle, and you can see it leaves a little bit of bulk up here. So I always like to just stitch this down a little bit across the top and across the bottom. All we have left now is just to sew the seam from ankle to ankle. What I will normally do is when I get to this dot, I will stop, back stitch, and then flip over and sew from here to here. And see how I stitch from here to here and then stopped and then flipped and then stitched here to here. I do like for the seam to be a little bit tighter, so I'm going to go ahead and use my serger on that. But if you don't have a serger, this is perfect. It's fine. Once it's turned right side out, you'll never even notice. All right, we've got our inside seam serged. Everything's done. Let's turn them right side out. Oh my gosh, this is one of my favorite parts. I love the little ruffles. Let's put these on and see how they look. Here she is in her dress we made earlier. If you remember the side that I stitched down like that, that is the back. So we're gonna go ahead and get her dressed. So we've got dress, we've got bloomers. Now all she needs is her apron. Next up, we have her apron, and apron is going to be piece 7 of 8377. I don't usually draw my marks on this piece until I've gone ahead and hemmed it and done the edges. Our instructions say narrow hem for upper and side edges of the apron, and it does the bottom separately. But what I like to do, because I have a serger, is I will change out my serger thread, so I'm using white thread, and I'm going to serge all of the sides, and then I will start hemming. So I've serged across the top, down the sides, and across the bottom. At this point, I will press down my top stitch, do the side stitch, and then after that, we'll do the bottom. I have top, bottom, and sides hemmed. Now, I want to reiterate here again, you do not have to have a serger to do this. The instructions don't call for a serger. It's just something I like to do because it's a tool that I have. I am going to deviate a little bit in their instructions for the next step. So we're doing the bottom hem now, and it comes up just about 2 inches. On our pattern, it shows the hem line and the rickrack line is 2 different lines, and it shows you to basically draw a line here and then put your rickrack on top. What I like to do is to hem this because if you look, you fold this up, it's very close. So I just fold it up a little bit further. I hem it here over the sew rickrack line, and then when I put the rickrack on, I follow the stitching line that I've already made. It's worked beautifully for me, and it just sort of eliminates a step. So I'm going to turn this up 2 inches here. I'm going to press it, and then I'll stitch all the way across. So here's our apron hemmed. All the sides are hemmed, and I've hemmed here. You can see the stitching line right here, and that's where our rickrack will go. Our next step is to add the gathering, and the way that I do this is I actually measure from our edge here. So now we've done our seam allowance, so I'm going to skip a 1/4 inch. So if I measure from this to this line, that's 1 1/4 inches. So I'm going to draw a line on the back side of my apron. On the top side, you can see the wider hem, that's our bottom. On the top side, 1.25 inches. I'm only going to draw the first line because once you stitch this first line, so here's where we are. Once you stitch this line, which will be right here, this is 1/4 inch away and that's 1/4 inch away. Each one of these should be a basting line, and then we're going to slide this along to make the gathers. If you have another way you like to make gathers, go for it. This is old and tried and true, and I only use a straight stitch machine for almost everything, so it works great for me. See, I lost the plot just a little bit right there, so I'm going to adjust and redraw right here. Once again, I'm going to baste this line, and then I'll baste 1/4 inch to the inside and then 1/4 inch to the inside of that. So I have my 3 rows of machine basting, and I did leave my tails long on both ends, so that'll make it easier to pull this up when we get to that step. We're going to move on to our waistband now, and the first thing I'm going to do is mark these dots. Our next step is going to be to turn in our seam allowance, which you can see is 1/4 inch, all the way around on this waistband. Here we are, all turned under. And I did want to say that if you are using white fabric to make an apron, you can also do this with bias tape. Next up, we're going to work on our shoulder straps. So these are going to be our shoulder straps. And what we're going to do is fold them right sides together. And we'll do 1/4 inch seam down one side. So you'll leave the little ends open. I've got both of these stitched. Now we're going to turn them right side out. Now our little shoulder strap tubes just need to be pressed. We're going to press them like this so that they have the little angle at the end, and then they'll be ready to go. Now is the fun part. We're going to start making our waistband with shoulder straps attached. This is assembly of our apron. So with our seam allowance on the inside, we're going to find our dots that we put on our waistband earlier. So our little dots right there, and easy peasy. We're going to put one here. I'm going to pin these for now, and then we'll baste them. So one here, find our little dots, make sure the strap isn't twisted, and then find this side. Again, I'm just pinning until I baste. Same thing on the other side. You want your seam allowance on the inside. Find our little dots. Line up the angle with the pressed in top of our waistband. Just a pin until we get it basted. Turn it here, make sure it's not twisted. Right in between the dots. Now I'm going to baste just the straps in place. I'm not going to go all the way down because I don't want that much thread to pick out later. We have our basting in, our straps are attached to the waistband. Next up, we need to add our ties. So these two pieces will be our ties. I've already marked the pleat on each tie. So what I need to do now is I need a hem on each long edge and on the end opposite to where the pleat will be. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do a narrow hem on these because you're going to see both sides of this. So I don't really want the back of this one serged. I have my ties made, and now we're going to pleat these and get them basted to the waistband. The instructions say to pleat them and then baste them and then add them to the waistband, but I really like to pleat them, pin them to the waistband, and then baste the whole thing together. That way I can make sure it's the right width. Since this is one of the trickier parts, I'm going to go ahead and show you guys exactly how I do this. So you have your pleat line, and you're basically bringing this guy together. And you can use the pleat line, you cannot use the pleat line. I've done it both ways. The primary thing is you want your pleat to be down. You want this inside pleat to be facing down, and you want this to be inside of here. So it needs to be a little bit narrower or about the same size as the waistband. Now what I found is an easier way to do that is to even hold them like this and literally just sew them together, because it shows you overlapping it and stitching it, but I find it just as easy to do it this way and then to just sew straight across. If you are at all unsure, baste it first because it's a lot easier to get out. Same thing on this side. You can see I have my pleat line. So I'm going to make sure that's down because it needs to be the opposite of this side. I'm going to hold these together. Here's what we look like basted. I'm quite happy with that. So I'm gonna go ahead and stitch it down. Now we have our waistband ready to go, and the fun part is here. We get to add this to the skirt of the apron. So I've put a pin in the center of the apron skirt here, and I'm gonna go ahead and find the center of the waistband, and that's gonna go right over the center where our pin is. From here, I'm going to grab my front basting stitches. A little bit tangled. I'm just going to pull them apart. And this is my favorite part, is just sliding this along and just gently pulling so that you're getting your pleats. So we get this as tidy as we can, and our goal is to have the outside edge meet where our strap is. So I need that to be a little bit smaller. And we want to keep our pleats nice and even. Let's get a few more here in the center. Okay, so it's a little bit smaller now, so I'm going to go ahead and pin this outside edge, and then we'll straighten these out. I'm pinning directly over where these basting lines are. So you'll see we've got our strap starts at the edge of the apron, and now we just need to make sure these are nice and even. And you can kind of tell if you lay it down and it looks a little lumpy in one part, you can tell, and you can fix that. You can add a little bit more here and slide it across as needed. So I am pretty happy with that. So I'm going to put a couple of pins in just to kind of hold it in place. And then I'm going to do the other side. So I have everything pinned. I'm gonna make sure that my little ends are tucked in right here. I want these strap ends tucked in. We want those to be underneath. And then I'm going to top stitch all the way across, down, all the way back across, up. I'm just gonna make sure that my pleats are underneath as I'm working. I always like to check the back too, just to make sure that the pleats look the way I want them to look on the back before I get started. It's very important when you're sewing to make sure you're keeping this part of your fabric away from your presser foot, because if it gets bunched up, you can end up with fabric getting caught that you didn't mean to, and that's not any fun to pick out. Ask me how I know. Okay, we're all top stitched. I need to pick out some basting. I need to trim some threads, and then this will be ready to wear. I have our basting pulled out, I have our threads snipped, and I almost forgot the most important part, the rickrack. So for the rickrack, I'm not even going to cut it. I'm going to put it on top of our hemline from earlier. I will snug that down, and then I'm going to top stitch all the way across. When I get to the other end, I will snip it off and tuck it under. This apron doesn't necessarily have to have rickrack, but it's one of my favorite things to do, and this will coordinate with the dress that we made for her earlier. Our apron is done, so why don't we see how it looks on? Here is our Raggedy Ann. Goes on very simply right over the shoulders. Give her a nice little bow back here. There we go. So nice little bow. Great little apron. I always do a little bit of tweaking because you usually need to. And there we go. One clean, restored, beautiful fluffy hair, all new clothes doll. She's ready to be loved again. And guys, thank you so much for coming along with me on this Raggedy Rescue. This is part 3 for this doll, so if you missed the first 2, be sure to go back and have a look. And next time, we'll be making clothes for her new twin brother, Raggedy Andy.